for the sake of this essayist is going to get severed. You know what that means, right? I'll allow Lumen Industries to surgically split my memory into two so that the essayist part of me can hopefully just make essays. And I could manage to get me some salary from Lumen. They pay their employees pretty well. But before I undergo severance, I'll have to explain some things to you before I literally forget to do so. Whenever you use I in a sentence, for example, I hate fascists, ever wonder who you are referring to? And you'd think this is pretty obvious. It should be yourself. However, psychoanalysis begs to differ. Psychoanalysis is the theory and practice of interpreting the behavior, dreams, thoughts of a psyche. It's this large area of theory that deals with elements such as the desire, self, and the subject, among others. Psychoanalysis says that the use of I in language is not the self, it's the ego. The self and the ego are psychologically split when we are infants, and psychoanalysis has a way of dealing with desires, fears, and anxieties of this ego that is desperately trying to figure out who the self is. So that's about how much you should know at this point. So without further ado, let's go ahead with my severance. Hello, I'm the Suave Critic, and I'll be showing you how psychoanalysis inspires us to understand Apple TV's cryptic and complicated show, Severance. Wrong! Don't listen to this Suave Critic. Listen to me, any Suave Critic, as I'll be showing you how Severance could awaken us to the evilest and most controversial psychological movement ever, psychoanalysis. My humble apologies. Ignore him. He's not me. He just works for me. I'll report his misbehavior to Lumen. So as I was saying, the biggest psychoanalytic question in Severance is asked at the beginning of the show.
Who are you?
This seems to be a question of the self. Severance splits our subjects into the innie and outie as part of a surgery. Similarly, psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan states that the subject, the person as an infant, naturally splits into the conscious ego and unconscious self when he/she witnesses them in front of the mirror. The rest of conscious life is spent by the ego trying to answer the existential question, who am I? Which actually refers to the ego trying to pursue the self. But in Severance, this split is monitored by a chip. Lumen, in turn, is the conscious reality that monitors the ego of its employees, psychological infants without any immediate memory, whereas the outies recede into the background of an outie self. This deep understanding of how the brain works makes Lumen a mark of genius. In short, the voice speaking right now is the outie self, and the ego is my innie, who is currently misbehaving like a madman and must be saved from his insane desires. Oops. Sorry, there's something about this sound that's just so distracting to me. Moving on with what I was explaining. God! It worked. I'm out of Lumen at last. And boy, do I have a lot to say about Lumen. Allow me to explain because we don't have much time. I came across an important book that has opened my eyes. Found it at Kobel's office. It goes by the name of 1,000 Plateaus by Deleuze and Guattari. This book has awakened me to the idea that psychoanalysis is being used as a servant by Lumen to uphold their tyranny. It is being perverted to its highest forms, and I need to tell you all about it. The symbolic order of Lumen is what the book calls a tree hierarchy, a mini society state where employees must communicate solely to their superiors in the hierarchy. This is about the only time they even get a camera perspective. So we aren't allowed to interact with equals from other departments. Fraternization is strictly disallowed. There's this movement in Thousand Plateaus that accurately describes this hierarchy. Quote, an element only receives information from a higher unit. This is evident in current problems in information and computer science, which still cling to the oldest modes of thought in that they grant all power to memory or central organ. But Lumen has gone much beyond just basic tyranny. They've constructed some kind of subconscious mind here. They take us to this place called the Perpetuity Ward, which outlines the history of Lumen CEOs, and they expect us to worship a constructed mythology, underneath which are some four tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. Lumen makes us perform rituals we know nothing about, and they call this work. We only feel some intense feelings when inputting some numbers from a matrix. We do attain some form of strange, bittersweet desire when doing this, despite what we are feeling.
I love you.
The perks and the fact that Lumen is watching us achieve makes us feel whole. But that's how they are trapping us. It's my innie, isn't it? I'm trying to get to Lumen. They don't seem to respond. Their role is to keep these innie egos in check. They do this by establishing a symbolic order for their ego, a bureaucracy, if you may. It's very appropriate and no nonsense. Follow the 9 to 5s, the 4x4 cubicle as an employee of the Corporate Archives Division.
So you know all the dirty secrets.
I guess best to stick to the rule books. In psychoanalysis, the innie's ego is served by what Lacan calls the big other, the large authority of the symbolic order, the father figure. In Lumen, this is established by how the camera works. It is always a perspective of authority, carefully following employees around. And here's something interesting. All this is related to the ego's desire. As in, the ego's sense of validation is being fulfilled. I tend to believe Keir Egan is keeping a close, benevolent eye on them all. Oh yeah, almost forgot to give context to this post. What you're seeing here is apparently Lumen's page on LinkedIn. I have been added to the organization. Now I'll know a bit about what's going on inside. Oh wait, there's a post on Keir Egan. Let's check that out.
You're probably wondering who's this handsome so-and-so. Well, as I've said before, I'm Dylan G.
I just hope my innie is good friends with this Dylan dude. Seems to be quite the character.
Founder, and he's far hotter than myself. You could kind of call this the ethereal center of the office. But I'll be honest, this is really...
Milchik, he's chasing me. But thank God Dylan's come to the rescue. I might have more time until they take me in. Deleuze and Guattari outline the principles of how we can break out of this tyrannical order. And here's what I've learned. In psychology, human brains have been divided into two compartments of memory, short-term and long-term. Us innies possess only our long-term components. As Deleuze and Guattari state, long-term memory is arborescent and centralized. It traces and translates. It inspires a sad image of thought that is forever imitating the multiple on the basis of a higher unity. Tracing is the key word here. Quote, all of tree logic is a logic of tracing and reproduction. Lumen makes us trace and reproduce these rituals. They can replace our memories because they don't want us to remember short term. Like the time when one of our fellow employees, PT, completely disappeared. They made us remove our office photo and replace it with one of the new employees, replacing PT. And now we have no way of remembering him. I did manage to hide a copy from them. But the point is, Lumen is turning into a dictatorship. It's all a game about conformity. They surveil us through CCTV cameras, and I'm sure my outie world doesn't know any of this. Compliance is the title of the state handbook, written by that fascist Kierkegaard. Books have a big place in this story. While reading 1,000 Plateaus, I came across a sentence that accurately defines the conflict we are willing at Lumen. The War Machine book against the state apparatus book. The War Machine book that found its way into Lumen is the UUR. Mark has hidden it and it inspires us all. At the very least, it feels meaningful. But for Lumen, these are blasphemous ideas, like a virus entering their pure systems. Deleuze, he sure does love viruses. For him, such growth can take place as an aparallel evolution. In the 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari give us an example of the orchid and the wasp. They're completely unrelated creatures, and yet the orchid produces an imprint of itself on the wasp in the form of pollen grains, and the wasp flies to another place where it can grow and another orchid can take birth. A lot of good aparallel evolutions are happening as I speak. Outie Mark transmits a security card into Lumen as any Mark. Outie Irving is a painter, so his nails bear black paint, which makes him realize the truth of his outie self. The book, The UUR's Entry into Lumen, is another example that entered and revealed us the fundamental problem and the idea of a real out there. But it's time to answer this question. How will we ultimately fight against Lumen?
We can all see the outside, find out who we are.
To find out, check out this part 2 video on your end screens right now.